December 21st, 1939. The Kolar River, 40 degrees below zero. A Soviet soldier moves through the forest, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. He's one of thousands pushing through the Finnish wilderness, part of Stalin's massive invasion force. Victory, they've been told, will come within weeks. He never sees the man who kills him. Somewhere in the white expanse, hidden among the snow-laden pines, a figure lies perfectly still. No scope glints in the pale Arctic light. No movement betrays his position. Just iron sights, steady breathing, and a patience forged in these very forests. One shot, the soldier falls. The figure doesn't move, doesn't celebrate. He simply works the bolt, watches, and waits for the next target. They would call him the White Death. But his name was Simo Häyhä, and in about 100 days, he would become the deadliest sniper in the history of warfare. This is his story. To understand the legend, you have to understand the land that created him. Simo Häyhä was born on December 17th, 1905, in the small municipality of Rautjärvi in southeastern Finland. This was not a land of cities or industry. This was the frontier, a place where forests stretched endlessly in every direction, where winters were brutal and unforgiving, and where survival meant knowing the land intimately. His family were farmers, simple people. His father, Juho, worked the soil and hunted to provide for 7 children. Simo was the 5th. There was no wealth here, no privilege, just hard work, long winters, and the expectation that you would pull your weight. But there was something else too. Something that would shape everything that came after. From the time he could walk, Simo was taught to hunt, not as a hobby or sport, but as necessity. In these remote forests, hunting meant survival. It meant food on the table when crops failed. It meant understanding animal behavior, reading tracks in snow, moving silently through terrain that could kill the careless. By the age of 10, Simo was already an accomplished marksman. Picture this: a boy, barely tall enough to shoulder a full-size rifle, slipping through the pre-dawn darkness. He knows every tree, every ridge, every depression in the land around his home. He's learned to move without sound, to control his breathing, to wait hours in the freezing cold for the perfect shot. He doesn't waste ammunition. Each cartridge is precious. Each shot must count. His weapon of choice would later become a Finnish-made Mosin Nagant M28-30, a rifle that would eventually be synonymous with his legend. Even then, Simo preferred iron sights. Scopes were expensive, prone to fogging in extreme cold, and they raised your profile. Iron sights meant simplicity, reliability, and one less thing that could fail. But hunting was only part of his education. Finland in the early 20th century was a nation caught between empires. For over a century, it had been a grand duchy of the Russian Empire, never truly independent, always watched. When the Russian Revolution erupted in 1917, Finland seized its chance. On December 6, 1917, the Finnish parliament declared independence. Simo was 12 years old. But independence came with a price. Almost immediately, Finland plunged into civil war, the Whites against the Reds, a brutal conflict that tore families and communities apart. Though Simo was too young to fight, the war shaped his generation's understanding of what freedom cost. When peace finally came, the newly independent Finland faced a stark reality. They now shared an 800-mile border with the Soviet Union, the world's largest nation, and a communist superpower openly hostile to capitalist neighbors. For young Finnish men like Simo, military service wasn't just duty, it was necessity. In 1925, at age 19, Simo Häyhä reported for his mandatory military service in the Finnish army. He was assigned to the Bicycle Battalion 2, part of the Viipuri province forces. For most conscripts, Military service was about 15 months of drilling, marching, and counting the days until they could return to civilian life. Simo was not most conscripts. He excelled immediately. The skills he'd honed in the forests, patience, marksmanship, land navigation, translated perfectly to military training. But more than that, his instructors noticed something unusual about him. Where other soldiers grew bored or restless during long exercises, Simo seemed to thrive. He could lie motionless for hours, could shoot accurately in conditions that made others give up, could move through terrain like he was part of it. By the end of his service in 1926, he had reached the rank of corporal and earned a reputation as one of the finest shots in his unit. But what set him apart wasn't just his shooting, it was his temperament. Calm, methodical, utterly unshakable. He returned to civilian life, back to the farm, back to the quiet rhythm of rural Finland. He joined the Suojeluskunta, the White Guard, a voluntary civil defense organization that trained Finnish men in military skills and preparedness. This wasn't unusual. Most Finnish men belonged to similar groups. The shadow of the Soviet Union loomed large, and everyone knew that peace was fragile. Simo continued to hunt, continued to practice, continued to perfect his craft. And then he waited. Throughout the 1930s, the international situation deteriorated. In Germany, Hitler rose to power. In Moscow, Stalin consolidated his brutal regime. Smaller nations watched nervously as the great powers positioned themselves for conflict. Finland tried desperately to maintain its independence through diplomacy. They fortified their borders. They trained their citizens. They prepared for a war they hoped would never come. But hope is not a strategy. In August 1939, the world watched in shock as Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ideological enemies, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that secretly divided Eastern Europe between them. Finland, the Baltic states, and Eastern Poland were allocated to the Soviet sphere of influence. The noose was tightening. In October 1939, Stalin made his move. He demanded that Finland cede territory around Leningrad for security purposes, hand over islands in the Gulf of Finland, lease the Hanko Peninsula for a Soviet naval base. The Finnish government refused. On November 30th, 1939, Soviet artillery opened fire across the border. Bombers struck Helsinki. 500,000 Soviet troops, backed by thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, poured across the Finnish frontier. The Winter War had begun. Simo Häyhä was 33 years old, a farmer and reservist. Within days, he would be called to defend his homeland against an invasion force that outnumbered the entire Finnish army, nearly 3-1. The quiet farmer was about to become a legend. The odds were impossible. The Soviet Union had over 190 million people. Finland had fewer than 4 million. The Red Army could field divisions equipped with modern tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Finland's military was small, under-equipped, and facing the largest invasion force ever assembled against a nation of its size. Stalin expected victory in weeks. Most international observers agreed. They were all wrong. Simo Häyhä reported to his unit, the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, and was deployed to the Kolar River sector in eastern Finland. This wasn't the main thrust of the Soviet invasion, but it was strategically vital. The Kolar had to hold, or Soviet forces would break through and split Finnish defences. The terrain was everything Finland needed. Dense forests, lakes, rivers, rolling hills covered in deep snow. For the massive Soviet mechanized columns, it was a nightmare. Tanks bogged down, supply lines stretched thin. Visibility was minimal. For Finnish soldiers who knew every meter of this land, it was home. And for Simo Häyhä, it was the perfect hunting ground. He was assigned as a sniper, a role he'd been training for unknowingly his entire life. His weapon remained his trusted Mosin Nagant M28-30 with iron sights. While many snipers preferred scoped rifles, Simo understood the Arctic battlefield better than most. Scopes fogged in extreme cold. They reflected light. They raised your sightline, forcing you to expose more of your head. Iron sights were lower, simpler, more reliable. In Simo's hands they were deadly. His tactics were simple, but devastatingly effective. He would find a position with good visibility and concealment, often on slight elevations where he could observe Soviet approach routes. He'd pile snow in front of him to hide muzzle flash and prevent snow from being blown up by the rifle's blast, which would give away his position. He'd place snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from creating visible vapor in the freezing air. Then he would wait. Soviet soldiers advancing through the forests never saw him. One moment they're moving forward, the next their comrade drops. Sometimes another shot immediately, sometimes silence, making them wonder if it was a random bullet. Then another man falls, and another. Panic begins to set in. Where is the shooter? Is it one sniper or many? How do you fight an enemy you can't see? The Soviets tried everything. They sent counter-snipers into the forests, but Simo moved positions constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. They launched artillery barrages at suspected locations. Simo would be elsewhere. They tried advancing only at night. Simo adapted, learning to shoot by moonlight reflecting off snow. Nothing worked. Reports began filtering back through Soviet command. Soldiers were being killed by someone in the Kola sector. One shooter, two, maybe. Nobody knew for sure. Finnish officers began to take notice too. Simo's confirmed kills were adding up at an extraordinary rate. 10, 20, 50. The number kept climbing. But here's what made Simo truly exceptional. It wasn't just his shooting. It was his survival instinct. Many snipers get one good day before they're located and killed. Simo operated effectively for months. He understood that survival meant discipline, never taking unnecessary risks, never letting success make you overconfident, always respecting the enemy's ability to adapt. He also used a submachine gun, a Suomi KP-31, for close-quarters combat, accounting for even more Soviet casualties in ambushes and defensive positions. His official confirmed tally would eventually reach around 505 kills with his rifle, with possibly another 200 with his submachine gun. Let that sink in for a moment. In approximately 95 to 100 days of combat, in temperatures that regularly dropped to 40 below zero, Simo Häyhä killed more enemy soldiers than any other sniper in recorded history. But numbers don't capture the psychological impact. Soviet soldiers began to fear the forest themselves. They called the Finnish snipers cuckoos because they seemed to materialize from nowhere, high in the trees or hidden in the snow. And among all the Finnish snipers, one became legendary. They called him Belaya Smrt, the White Death. Fear is a powerful weapon. As the winter war ground on through December and January, something remarkable was happening. Despite overwhelming numbers and firepower, the Soviet advance had stalled. The massive invasion force that was supposed to sweep through Finland in weeks was instead bleeding itself to death in the forests. And everywhere Soviet soldiers looked, death waited in the snow. Finnish tactics, what would later be called Motti tactics, involved allowing Soviet columns to advance, then cutting them off, surrounding them, and systematically destroying them. Small, mobile Finnish ski troops moved through the forests with devastating effect, hitting supply lines and isolated units. But it was the snipers who terrified them most. Word of Simo Häyhä spread through the Soviet ranks like a ghost story. Soldiers whispered about the sniper who never missed, who could shoot through blizzards, who appeared and disappeared like smoke. Some claimed he wasn't human. Others said he must be using black magic. The truth was simpler and somehow more terrifying. He was just a farmer who knew his land and his craft better than anyone else. Soviet command became obsessed with killing him. They organized special operations specifically to hunt the White Death. Counter-sniper teams were deployed with the sole mission of finding and eliminating Simo Häyhä. None succeeded. Back in Finland, Simo was becoming a national hero. Newspapers ran stories about the phantom sniper of Kola. His kill count was reported with a mixture of pride and awe. In a war where Finland was desperately outmatched, Simo represented something vital, proof that skill, courage, and knowledge of the land could triumph over raw numbers. But Simo himself remained unchanged. Fellow soldiers described him as quiet, humble, almost shy. He didn't boast about his kills. He didn't seek glory. When asked about his success, he would shrug and say he was simply doing his duty. "I only did what I was told to do as well as I could," he would later say. There was no bravado, no warrior mystique, just a farmer defending his home. By February 1940, the Winter War had become an international sensation. Against all odds, tiny Finland was holding off the Soviet giant. Volunteers from Sweden, Norway, and other countries flooded in to help. Finland had become a symbol of resistance against tyranny, and Simo Häyhä had become the face of that resistance. His superiors later promoted him to second lieutenant, a rare honor recognizing his extraordinary service after the war during his recovery. But promotion meant little to Simo. He continued his work with the same quiet determination, every day into position, every day watching, waiting, shooting. The Soviets threw everything at the Kola River sector. Artillery bombardments that turned entire forests into splinters. Human wave attacks with fresh divisions, tanks and armoured vehicles. The line held, and Simo continued to hunt. But war has a way of evening the odds. No matter how skilled you are, no matter how careful, eventually luck runs out. For Simo Häyhä, that moment came on March 6, 1940. March 6, 1940. The war has been raging for 97 days. Simo is in position, doing what he's done countless times before. The temperature is brutal, -40 Celsius with wind that cuts through any protection. He's scouting Soviet positions, calculating ranges, preparing for another day of precise, lethal work. Then, in an instant, everything changes. The details of exactly what happened remain somewhat unclear, as battlefield moments often are. What we know is this: an explosive bullet struck Simo in his jaw. Some accounts say it was a lucky shot from a Soviet soldier firing randomly into the Finnish positions. Others claim it was a deliberate counter-sniper shot that finally found its mark. Some reports suggest it may have been shrapnel from an artillery shell. The result was catastrophic. The bullet, or shrapnel, tore through the left side of Simo's face, destroying his jaw and cheek. The impact was so severe that fellow soldiers who reached him thought he was dead. His face was unrecognizable, blood pouring from the massive wound. Against all odds, Simo was still alive. His comrades pulled him from the position under continued fire and rushed him to an aid station. From there, he was evacuated to a field hospital. The injury was so severe that doctors gave him little chance of survival. The damage was extensive. Shattered bone, destroyed tissue, massive blood loss. Simo Häyhä fell into a coma. He remained unconscious for a week. While he lay between life and death, the war he'd fought so hard in was ending. On March 13, 1940, exactly 1 week after Simo was wounded, Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Peace Treaty. The Winter War was over. Finland had lost. They were forced to cede 11% of their territory, including the Karelian Isthmus and the city of Viipuri. Over 400,000 Finns became refugees, forced to abandon their homes in the ceded territories. But they had survived as an independent nation. Against an enemy that outnumbered them 3-1, the Finnish military had inflicted staggering casualties on the Red Army. Soviet losses were estimated at over 300,000 dead or missing, compared to Finland's 25,000 dead. The world had witnessed something extraordinary. A small nation had stood against a superpower and, though forced to make painful concessions, had maintained its sovereignty. And Simo Häyhä had become a symbol of that resistance. On March 13th, the day the peace treaty was signed, Simo woke from his coma. His first words, according to accounts, were asking about the other men in his unit. The war was over. He had survived. But his face would never be the same. Recovery was long and painful. Simo underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct his jaw and face. The left side of his face remained permanently disfigured, a visible reminder of that March day in 1940. He would deal with pain and medical issues related to the wound for the rest of his life. But he was alive. And more than that, he was a legend. He was promoted to second lieutenant during his recovery, an honor recognizing not just his extraordinary combat record, but what he represented to a nation that had suffered but endured. At 5'3" tall, he was the most celebrated soldier in Finnish history. Yet Simo wanted none of the attention. When he was well enough, he returned to Rautjärvi, or what had been Rautjärvi. His family's farm was now on the Soviet side of the new border, ceded in the peace treaty. Like hundreds of thousands of other Finns, his family had been forced to relocate. They settled in Ruokolahti in eastern Finland, and Simo, the legendary White Death, became a farmer again. He bought land, built a house, returned to the quiet rhythms of rural life, planting, harvesting, hunting. He bred dogs, he hunted moose and game birds. He lived simply, as he always had. When people asked him about the war, he was reluctant to discuss it. He never boasted about his record, never embellished the stories. He would acknowledge what happened, but always with a matter-of-fact tone that discouraged further questions. "I did what I had to do, and I'm still standing." "That's enough," he once said. The war, however, wasn't quite finished with Finland. In 1941, Finland entered what they called the Continuation War, joining Germany in attacking the Soviet Union, primarily to reclaim the territory lost in the Winter War. Simo was too injured to return to combat, though he remained in the reserves. This war would not go well. By 1944, facing Soviet counter-offensives and increasing pressure, Finland again made peace with the USSR. More territory was lost, more painful concessions made, but again, Finland survived as an independent nation, the only country bordering the Soviet Union to do so. Through it all, Simo remained on his farm. He married Esther in 1959. They met through mutual friends. And though they never had children, by all accounts, it was a happy partnership. They lived quietly, away from cities, away from attention. But legends don't fade easily. Over the years, military historians began to study the Winter War in detail. Simo's record was analysed, verified and confirmed. Over 500 confirmed sniper kills in approximately 100 days of combat. No sniper before or since has come close to that record. Journalists sought him out. Military delegations from around the world visited. They all wanted to meet the man behind the legend, to understand how he'd accomplished what he did. Simo received them graciously, but always with the same humble demeanour. He was quick to deflect praise, quick to credit his fellow soldiers, quick to point out that he'd simply been doing his job. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, interest in his story resurged. Books were written, documentaries filmed. He was recognized by the Finnish government with various honors and awards. He participated in some of these events, appearing at commemorations and military ceremonies. Photos from his later years show an elderly man, the left side of his face still bearing the scars of that March day in 1940, but his eyes sharp and clear. When asked the secret to his success as a sniper, he gave the same answer he'd given for decades: practice. Simo Häyhä lived to see the new millennium. He watched Finland transform from a rural, agricultural society to a modern, prosperous nation. He saw the Cold War begin and end. He saw Finland maintain its independence and democracy through all of it. On April 1st, 2002, at the age of 96, Simo Häyhä died peacefully in a veterans' nursing home in Hamina, Finland. Thousands attended his funeral. The President of Finland sent condolences. Veterans' organizations honored him. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the ordinary Finnish people who lined the streets. People who understood that Simo represented something essential about their nation's character. Determination, resilience, the willingness to stand against impossible odds. The quiet strength of someone who does what must be done without complaint, without expectation of glory. What do we make of Simo Häyhä's story today? In an age where warfare has been transformed by drones, precision missiles, and technological supremacy, there's something almost mythical about a farmer with an iron-sighted rifle holding off an invasion force. It feels like it belongs to another era entirely, and yet his story resonates precisely because it speaks to something timeless. Let's be clear about what Simo accomplished. His confirmed kill count of over 500 enemy soldiers remains the highest for any sniper in any military conflict in history. The next highest confirmed count, from World War II Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev, was around 225. Simo's record is more than double, but numbers alone don't explain his impact. Militarily, Simo and snipers like him played a crucial role in the Winter War. The psychological effect of invisible marksmen in the forests was devastating to Soviet morale. Soldiers who fear being shot at any moment by an enemy they never see become cautious, slow, demoralized. For the outnumbered Finns, this force multiplication was critical. One skilled sniper could pin down or demoralize an entire Soviet company, could slow advances, could create the kind of grinding, costly warfare that made Stalin's quick victory impossible. But Simo's impact extended far beyond military tactics. He became a symbol. During the Winter War, while Finland fought for survival, Simo represented the possibility that skill, determination, and intimate knowledge of the land could overcome raw power. In the darkest hours of the war, his story gave Finns hope. After the war, he came to represent Finnish national character, sisu, as they call it. There's no perfect English translation, but it encompasses determination, resilience, perseverance in the face of adversity, courage even when the odds are impossible. Simo embodied sisu, not through grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but through quiet, persistent competence. Through doing his job, day after day, in the most extreme conditions imaginable, and perhaps most importantly, through his humility. In an age of celebrity and self-promotion, Simo remained genuinely modest about his achievements. He could have leveraged his fame into wealth or political power. He chose to return to farming. He could have written memoirs, accepted lucrative speaking engagements, become a professional war hero. He chose silence and simplicity. This matters because it shows that his heroism wasn't performative. It was authentic. He fought because his home was invaded, because his duty called, because his people needed him. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was what needed to be done. Of course, we must also grapple with the complexity of celebrating a man whose skill lay in taking human life. Simo killed hundreds of Soviet soldiers. Each one was someone's son, brother, or father. Each death was a tragedy for someone. War, even defensive war, even necessary war, is horror. There's no way around that truth, but context matters. Finland did not invade the Soviet Union. Finland did not seek war. When 500,000 Soviet troops poured across the border, when bombs fell on Helsinki, Finnish citizens faced annihilation of their independence, possibly their nation itself. Simo Häyhä was a defender. Every soldier he shot was part of an invasion force in his homeland. This doesn't erase the tragedy of those deaths, but it provides crucial moral context. He took no pleasure in killing. He never spoke with satisfaction about his record. When asked about his feelings regarding the enemy soldiers he killed, he reportedly said simply, "I did what I was told to do as well as I could." Duty, not bloodlust, not hatred, just duty. Today you can visit monuments to the Winter War across Finland. Museums display artifacts, memorials honor the fallen. The landscape itself, the forests, the lakes, the rolling terrain remains much as it was in 1939. If you visit the Kola River sector where Simo fought, it's quiet now, peaceful. The old defensive positions have long since been reclaimed by nature. Trees grow where men once died. Snow falls on ground that once ran red. But the memory remains. Simo Häyhä's story has been told and retold, studied and analysed, celebrated and debated. Video games feature him. Books document his record. Military academies around the world study his tactics. But perhaps the most important legacy isn't the confirmed kill count or the tactical lessons. It's what his story says about human potential. That ordinary people, when called upon, can achieve extraordinary things. That skill, preparation, and determination can overcome overwhelming odds. That true heroism doesn't require boasting or self-aggrandizement. It simply requires doing what's right as well as you can, even when the stakes are impossibly high. Simo Häyhä was 5'3". He had no formal military training beyond basic conscription. He came from a farming family in rural Finland. By all conventional measures, he was ordinary. But when his nation needed him, he became extraordinary. Not through supernatural ability or impossible luck, but through the perfection of skills he'd spent a lifetime developing. Through discipline, patience, and an unwavering commitment to his duty. In the snow-covered forests of eastern Finland, in temperatures that would kill the unprepared, in combat against overwhelming numerical superiority, a quiet farmer became the deadliest sniper in history. They called him the White Death. But his name was Simo Häyhä, and his story reminds us that legends aren't born. They're forged in the crucible of impossible odds, by ordinary people who refuse to give up. The Winter War was fought and won not just by generals and politicians, but by thousands of Finns like Simo, farmers, loggers, shopkeepers, who knew their land and loved their country enough to stand against an empire. Simo happened to be the best shot among them. When he died in 2002 at age 96, he'd lived to see Finland thrive as an independent nation, prosperous, democratic, and free. The country he'd fought for had survived everything the 20th century could throw at it. In a way, that's the ultimate victory. Not the kill count, not the legend, but that the land he defended, the people he fought for, endured. Somewhere in the forests of Finland, snow is falling tonight. The same forests where Simo Häyhä once waited, watched, and protected his home. The sniper is gone. But the memory of what one person can do when everything is on the line, that remains. And that's a legacy that will never fade.